Am I on? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Anger is a tool. In fact, of all of the emotions in our toolbox, anger may be the one most commonly used for a specific purpose. It's a very old emotion. Probably the next emotion critters came up with after fear. We share it with a wide swath of animals, just about anything with a brain. Unlike shame, which few animals feel, or generosity. The thing about very old attributes is that it tells you that the attribute is really important, or it wouldn't have passed the time test. Despite that, we seriously do not like anger. I don't. Confession, I don't deal with it well at all. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 5 being center line and 10 being total freak out in the face of anger, I'm about a 15. So don't be totally surprised if I get a little riled up during this talk. I had a philosophy class in college, and one section was on anger, and the instructor was adamant that anger was just plain bad in all situations. When asked about a person who might be angry at injustice, like say a civil rights demonstrator, the instructor replied that in that case, it wouldn't be anger, it would be righteous indignation. Well, while righteous indignation is a great progressive term for justifiably pissed, in the end, the words we use to describe it do not change the emotion, nor does it change the many ways that anger is useful in our lives. The example of the civil rights demonstrator is a perfect example of what is arguably the most important use of anger, and that is as an antidote to fear. Balancing fear and anger in the brain is an important and complicated job. If you need to run or cower or hide, you want fear. If you need to stand your ground or fight, you want anger. For humans, intending to stand up to something scary, whether the expected response to sitting in a white diner while black, or just the guy bigger than you trying to take your food, we need a push in the brain to get over the fear, and that push is anger. For most animals, this is the only use of anger. But for animals that live in groups, there's another use, and that is communication. Anger always comes with an implied threat of violence. Most people think that if they do not intend to get violent when they are angry, that there is no threat, but there is. Whether they intend it or not, expressions of anger are read as dangerous to those who see it. So the proper use of anger actually reduces violence and conflict and improves. It informs people that violence is a possible consequence of intended action and gives them the opportunity to decide if that course of action is worth the violence and possibly back off before contact. It's very effective at this too. Humans react to anger quickly and strongly. In fact, we react to anger faster than anything else, including fear. And the only thing that drives a message lesson home better, that is how likely you are to actually modify your behavior, better than anger is pain. You add anger and pain together and you're really going to drive a lesson home. Although this talk is not exactly about anger, it's about wrath. Wrath being the outward expressions of anger, which, by the way, does not always mean actual violence. The other outward expressions of anger, words, tone, expression, etc., are also wrath. And while the sin of wrath is all around damaging to individuals, relationships, and the world at large, especially when world leaders engage in it with armies, wrath is not always a sin. In fact, wrath is the only sin on the list of the big seven that God engages in. Not only that, But God doing it is touted and bragged about by preachers, believers, and even in God's own holy book. Oops. God's own holy book. The fact that wrath is so useful that even God engages in it as needed makes defining when wrath is a sin a bit of a fuzzy process. It's definitely a line that moves and changes with time and different cultures. The Vikings had very high levels of acceptable wrath. A man who never got in a fight would be looked at with some concern. The San Bushmen have very low levels. Just raising your voice is frowned upon. Of course, there's an easy out, one that a lot of people I know take, and that is that it only becomes wrong, i.e. a sin, when it becomes physical, which is an easy but hardly a realistic point of view. I'm probably one of the few people on the planet who applauded Will Smith for smacking Chris Rock. For those who either don't know or don't remember what happened, Rock, who was hosting the Academy Awards in 2022, made fun of Jada Smith's alopecia, which is a medical condition which, among other things, makes her hair fall out. So Jada was sitting at the awards with her bald head in full view. Joking with the audience, Rock said, "Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane too. Can't wait to see you." Will Smith laughed it off at first, but then he turned and he looked at Jada, who was clearly hurt. So he stood up, walked over, and slapped Chris Rock. He let Chris know in no uncertain terms that this was not okay, and it shouldn't happen again. In my opinion, Will's violent response was measured and totally appropriate. He could have decked him and knocked him to the ground, but instead he hit him with an open-handed slap. Chris used a heartless joke for a cheap laugh at the public expense of Will's wife. And while there was no physical contact, Jada was clearly hurt. And Will obviously thought a man is supposed to protect his wife. Now, Will had decided to make a big social media stink about it. He probably could have ruined Rock's career with valid accusations of him making fun of a disheartening medical condition. He probably would have been applauded for it too, but since he stood up and hit him, he was vilified, boycotted, and lambasted. But it seems to me he got the point across much faster and better that way, and did less damage to Chris Rock in the process. He didn't want to hurt him. He just wanted to get the point across that attacking Jada was not acceptable. One of the fallacies about saying that wrath is always and only a sin if it becomes physical is that words cannot harm you, which most of us understand from personal experience is not true. In fact, research has shown that non-physical attacks, such as humiliation, blame, slander, pushing tender buttons, and making fun of things that people are sensitive about, does more lasting harm than physical injuries. And the other important fallacy is that non-violent outward expressions of anger likewise are of no concern. Anger is perhaps the most difficult emotion to hide. A person who is very angry, especially someone who is habitually angry, can be like an alcoholic, who, when challenged about being drunk, keeps insisting that they're not drunk, even though everyone in the room can see that they're falling down. Even when a person is trying to act like they are not angry, they run into the issue that anger is a flashing red neon sign that everybody notices. It's almost impossible to feel anger and not display wrath. As mentioned, humans react to wrath quickly and strongly, even if they're not noticing that they do. If you put a group of people with heart monitors in a room, and somebody showing anger walks into the room, the heart rate in the entire room goes up immediately, even on the people who look like they're not noticing. Humans notice anger. We react to wrath. We can't help it. In fact, in the face of strong wrath, your only real choices are acquiesce or counter with your own. And the people who are very good at being very angry get to just win virtually all minor conflicts. All they have to do is make sure the implied level of violence is above the importance of conflict. Shock and surprise. People don't like it when they always lose without regard to whether or not they're in the right. And if someone has a high willingness to back up implied violence with real violence, that single angry person can make a family unit nearly unworkable. They can severely damage a work environment or disrupt an entire community, not to mention what world leaders can do. This is why, even though wrath is extremely useful and necessary in a group, we all don't like it. And if the effectiveness isn't enough to encourage its overuse, add in that it feels good to be angry. This dislike of anger we have is dislike of other people's anger. Being around anger is clearly bad for people. It's highly stressful. It takes a lot of attention and energy. It interferes with relaxation, sleep, communication, digestion, just about everything. But research overwhelmingly indicates that feeling anger increases optimism, self-confidence, and creativity. It releases painkillers and energy boosters. And anger is never, ever wrong in the eyes of the angry person, at least while they're angry. Their anger is always justified. It's one of the things that anger does in your brain. It gives a sense of surety, of rightness. Very helpful for one person standing in front of their kids staring down for opponents. All the while, it's causing us to be self-righteous, judgmental, critical, and always on the search for someone to blame. Being angry enhances the sense of being wrong, of being a victim. The angrier one gets, the more just in their anger they become. Anyone who's dealt with angry people, especially anyone who's dealt with angry people knows that it is virtually impossible to have any kind of reasonable conversation, especially defense against blame or accusations, while a person is still angry. Wrath burdens every person who has to deal with it. It makes every task and every communication more difficult. People who have a big problem with wrath, like myself, are almost always that way due to an overuse by one or both parents. When a parent displaying wrath is likely to lead to violence, pain, fear, loss of freedoms or precious things, crying and pleading, and generally a bad day, then kids learn to be very sensitive to anger. Extreme, capricious, or constant wrath can be genuinely debilitating to those on the receiving end. It's probably easier to define when wrath is not a sin than when it is. And wrath is not a sin only when it is necessary, just, and measured. Of course, some people might assert that wrath is never actually necessary. After all, there's always some other way to do what you're trying to do without wrath, which might be technically true, but when you're talking about affecting the behavior of other humans, how fast and how well you do that often matters, sometimes a lot. It's a very good way to say, stop hurting me. Others might say that wrath, especially with violence, is only necessary in response to physical violence. I don't agree with that either. Again, nothing says stop that faster and better than a little rock. As with Chris Rock, people can be very hurtful with neither violence or anger. So the question of necessary, just, and measured is never going to be easy to define, especially since an angry person always feels their wrath is necessary, just, and measured. This is where community standards really come into play. The Song Bushmen have virtually no tolerance for wrath. They live in a very austere environment. Anger takes energy, and it disrupts group cohesion. They can survive only with calm, efficient cooperation. Vikings, very high tolerance for wrath. Attacks from outside groups were common, and a willingness to fight fiercely meant survival. So what are our community standards? Well, like most of our great vices, we get a very mixed message from our culture. Now, without going into the extension discussion, it would require to explain why I think this. I will assert that our current situation is much more like the Song Bushmen than the Vikings. In general, anger is expensive in our modern world. We have a dense population with a lot of dangerous weapons. We're all very aware of guns, but also bank accounts, cars, viral social media memes. It is really easy in the modern world to hurt each other. But while we do seem to have some recognition that real violence is dangerous, and mostly we decry any sort of physical violence, vis-a-vis Will Smith, we have violence and anger and all forms of wrath around us always. You almost can't put enough violence in a movie to get an X rating for it. We positively glorify violence and all forms of wrath and anger. Trump announced with pride that he is more angry for this campaign than he was with the last one. Bill Clinton was viewed more favorably when he reacted to the issues with Monica Lewinsky with anger rather than remorse, despite the fact that virtually everyone in this nation thought what he did was wrong. We actively encourage people to be angry. I think we mostly call it not taking shit, which seems to mean stand up and get in someone's face anytime anyone does anything that irritates you in even the slightest way. And since all things corporate are disrespecting and irritating us every minute of every day, getting in other people's faces seems to have become a national pastime. And since the rule in the US is if it makes you money, you get to do it. And since wrath will make you piles of money in entertainment and video games and bring you plenty of success as a politician or a journalist or a podcaster, we live in a world where visible wrath is a daily part of our lives. And like pride and envy, the fact that we are encouraging what we should be discouraging is creating a world where wrath is rampant. We do not seem to actually have anything we can say is a community standard on wrath. We're ready to ask why some fool in a drive-thru had a gun, but not why he was angry and justified enough to actually feel that not getting enough salt on his burger justified trying to kill the person who handed him the burger. We don't even know what to do with someone who didn't get a biscuit with his order and decided to drive his car into the side of Popeyes. Controlling anger requires awareness and practice. It's something Beth learned as a child, and Beth's learned by proper example setting in the home. Of course, the more common it becomes in the culture, the more children will see anger and violence, even if their parents do not display it. It is believed that children do not actually understand the difference between real violence and screen violence until about 5. Might have something to do with a kindergartner bringing a large kitchen knife to school and threatening teachers and fellow kids with it. Here's the thing. There's a reason why wrath is on the list of deadly sins, even though God doesn't. Wrath is expensive. It damages group cohesion. It hurts relationships. It causes stress. It takes energy. It's never a question of if wrath does damage. It's a question of if the wrath is worth the damage that it does. Gratuitous wrath is a sin. Excessive wrath is a sin. Capricious wrath is a sin. Only just, necessary, and measured wrath is not. Thank you.